Great. So good afternoon and welcome to the 9th seminar in the 2016 series of the Digital Classicist London seminar series. This is the last seminar this summer. We'll be back again next June with the 2017 series. So we're extremely happy that this week we'll be rounding off the seminar series with a presentation and a discussion of data visualization, which will give us lots to think about for the next 10 months before we come back, I think. So without further ado, I'm extremely happy to welcome Silke Vanbeselaere from the University of Leuven in Belgium, who will talk about exploring ancient sources with data visualization. Thank you, Silke.
Okay, hello. So we're going to be talking about data visualization. I'm going to give you a broad kind of introduction, but then I'm also going to move on to what I actually do. And I make network visualizations and I do network analysis of ancient sources. But first, we're going to talk about data visualization, all the kinds, well, not all the kinds, but quite a few there are, and what you can do with them, what you can expect from them, how you can do them without having to know all this coding and programming, because that's quite useful, I think, to know. So first of all, according to Wikipedia, what is data visualization? Well, it is seen as a modern equivalent of visual communication. I often encounter people who think that data visualization is something totally new, and it's really not. It's just a new way of visual communicating. Yeah, we'll see a couple of examples of that. And another part of that definition that I find very important is that they say that it involves the creation and study of the visual representation of data. So it's not just being able to create and communicate, but also study what you get as a result, because the visualization is basically already a sort of result that you can start interpreting. I'll talk more about that in a second. So as I said, yes, it's a modern thing, but it's just a modern equivalent of what we have been doing all along. It's actually a very traditional thing. We're just using new tools. I mean, for example, the map of Ptolemy, that is a data visualization. He does it slightly different from how I would do it now. But I mean, that it is a visualization of geographical data that you have. So that's exactly the same. Even Florence Nightingale, she's very famous, I hope still, for her rose charts. She used them to communicate and convince other people in the war, that in the Crimean War, that actually people, well, soldiers, British soldiers, died more because of epidemic disease than actually they did on the battlefield. But nobody really, took much notice. But when she produced these charts that were visually so provocative, they actually started believing her. So it's a tool that can help you just communicate, but also convince people of the point you're making. Another thing, this is another example of a mid-19th century cholera outbreak right here in London. John Snow actually made this map, and he put on this map, the little red blocks that you see is the number of deaths in each house that occurred. And the blue circles are where the street pumps are. So before they thought that because of polluted air that people got cholera, but it was actually because of water, we now know. But he used this not just to convince people later on of what his results were, but also for himself to try and discover, so is there another reason? It didn't make sense to him that this is how cholera spread. And then he found that it was all centered around this specific street pump that I think is still in Soho actually, but without the handle as a sort of sign. So I think those are very important things for me, that data visualization can be used for so many different reasons. So the communication, the persuasion of people, but also to explore your data in a different way. Obviously, you're still going to use all these other sources. John Snow did not just use this map, right, to get his result, but he did use it on the side as well, together with all the other sources. And another thing that is important is the creation of them. You need to know how to, if you want to use them, how to create them, or you have to know a person who knows how to create them, and then ask the right questions of them. I think that's actually the most important point, because you can always find an answer, I think, for anything, as long as you sort of manipulate your question well enough. Okay, a couple of examples that we will talk about more is visualization of text mining research that you've done, or what I do, network analysis, we'll start with a really simple one, and that is the Wordcloud. I think everybody's familiar with that. It pops up everywhere, and it's not always that useful. The good things about it is that it's very simple, and it gives you an immediate sort of view on the sources that you're using. For example, I just made these really quickly. On the left side, you can see the first 4 chapters, I think, of Caesar's De Bello Gallico. And even if you haven't read it, just this word cloud represents immediately sort of what those 4 chapters are about. And it also, when I saw this, I thought, that's interesting, because usually all that he really talks about, from what I can remember, is the Roman army and, you know, all that constantly. But these 4 first chapters are a lot more about the people that they are going to fight and that lived in those, you know, in the areas that they were going to. But also there's almost all the adjectives that are in there that obviously appear the most in those 4 chapters are quite positive, well, masculine kind of qualities, powerful and large and great, and these kind of things that I don't do research into this, but that I would think, that's probably interesting to people have probably done this. But as an example, somebody who does this might maybe think, it would be interesting to see whether he does describe all these people at first before they start fighting them as these great, you know, the noble kind of wild people, because then they went into battle with them, so it's even better to come out, you know. That's sort of what we know, but this sort of represents that, I think. Obviously, we haven't done any more research. Well, I haven't done any more research in this, but this is just an example of how this can help you to get started. On the right-hand side, that's a thing that I know a bit more. I just picked 6 random sale contracts from around Babylonia, going from around 2000 BC to 500 BC. And the word that appears most together in those 6 documents is son, but also year and king and witnesses and scribe. And that all makes sense. It's sort of already, before I've done anything, it immediately, I didn't know these sources very well, but it immediately showed to me, so they always use the same probably dating kind of thing. In this year of that king, that's why those 2 things appear probably everywhere. Son is obviously there for identifying people, because they would have said X, son of Y. They probably did that all throughout that time period. That makes sense. And a scribe and witnesses. So there probably were witnesses in almost all of those contracts. That's interesting as well. And a scribe makes sense. So this is, you know, how a word cloud can be a bit useful. It's not top of the visualizations, but it is still a useful thing, I think. Definitely to get started maybe with data visualization. Then there's text mining and topic modeling. So with topic modeling, you can get the program to do, you know, a very basic one for you, and it will it will show you what the keywords are of a certain text. So I'm still working with those same 6 sale documents that I just talked about. And the 5 most appearing words are the ones that you can see on the top there: son, king, year, house, and scribe. In topic modeling, obviously, it will suggest certain words together under a topic, so you can discover different topics in your text. This is a bit more simple than that, but this is a visualization of the text mining that you can do. And even though it's not in a chronological order, it shows that you can get a graph even of this kind of textual evidence and see that even a bit more than in the word clouds. You can totally see that the king and the year and the scribe, those words are just very consistent all throughout those more than 1,000 years. They just keep appearing. And then the other things are a bit different. It's not that interesting, this kind of data immediately, because obviously it's used as an example. But this is the sort of thing that you could do if you had sources that you know very well and you know how to, you know, what question to ask this and put it in a simple program like this one. I mean, I haven't had to do any coding or anything like that at all. You do get a result and you can start working with it. And if you get an interesting result, I would say to take it a bit further, either to learn how to make a proper data visualization, how to do proper topic modeling, or ask somebody who knows that and go on from there. But this is not what I do. But I think it does give a good example of what you can do. This, I think this is quite an interesting one. So again, I don't know these sources at all very well. But this is a scatter plot of the same text mining that had been happening. And then they put, well, if I explain in a very simple way, they put the texts closest together in the graph, depending on how much they have in common. And I thought that it wasn't going to be the time that was going to be the thing that put them together, because the computer does not know when these texts are published, right? They just know the words in there, the English words that were in there. And I thought, oh, surely it's going to put the slave sale documents together, because there's two slave sale documents there. And then maybe the crop and dates and wheat thing, that's probably sort of same thing, because but it didn't. So that was just, it shows that sometimes visualizations can surprise you. There's a very easy explanation for this, obviously, because they used more of the same, the coin and other things, but there's still 300 years difference between that. So it's not just saying, oh, it was the same king that was the ruler. And so this would be something, if I did this, that would interest me, for me to go and check, oh, what are all these things that they have in common in the real estate and the slave document? And is it that different from sale documents that much later? Even though they shared lots of the same keywords, sort of general structure, I would have thought, but maybe not. Anyway, we're never going to find out, because that's, again, not what I do. This is just an example.
Do you have any control over the way that this groups words together and compares the documents? Or is it some magic software that you have to trust?
So what exactly would you want to change, so that I get?
Well, just to know what it's doing.
You can't choose that much at all, because it's a very simple one here. So you could go into R and get a proper scatter plot and choose everything yourself and know how it works. But in this, you basically just give in your text and it does everything by itself. And then you choose what you want to see, whether you want to see a scatter plot or anything else, a word cloud, things like that. But you can choose, if you want to go into more specific details about certain keywords and stuff, you're able to do that. But not much more than that. That's why it's so simple and everybody can work with it. So it's always sort of, if you really want to go into this, and if that is your research, you're not going to use this tool. This is just to see, is this something that could, that I could get into, I think, or just to play around with, I think. Otherwise, you'd take it seriously and you'd learn a thing, or you'd hire somebody if you have the money. Is that okay? Then something else that we all know very well, that seems a bit lame, but the timeline. But I think where, for me, a timeline is really revealing is when you can have overlaps of things. This is of the early patriarchs in the Bible, and just seeing that those 9 generations are alive at the same moment. Obviously, we know this is not a mistake or anything, it's what the Bible says. But it's just interesting to be able to see that visually, because you may know that, but to immediately see it like that and how suddenly there's these gaps in there, it's just interesting as a visualization. This won't show us that we've made mistakes in our data, because it's correct, but it could do that as well, which is always useful. A visualization may sometimes show you that you've made a mistake, and that has happened to me many times, and I'm very grateful to the visualization for that. But also, I saw one of these timelines, and it's not about ancient history, but it could be. It's somebody, a minister in Mexico, put in all his all the money that he had to get back because he was on trips and all that. And when people put that in, they didn't want to go through all of it, right? And they put it into text mining things, and they made a timeline of it as well that was overlapping. There were a couple of expenses in different places on the same day that were overlapping. So they saw, okay, there's something wrong here. That would have been probably a mistake in our data, or not. There might have been something going on there that isn't quite right. So it's not an ancient history example, but it is an example of something that you think is so simple, but can actually give you a sort of different view on your data, whatever it is you're working with. It is difficult, though, with BC dates. That's the thing I need to add. most programs, if you're not going to do the coding or programming yourself, will have, even if you do the coding yourself, will have a lot of trouble if anything is before 1970 sometimes. And then trying to explain to the people who've set up the program that I need 500 BC or before that, it's just, the first thing that they've ever heard about that. But a thing that you can always do that I've learned from Gabby, it's very simple. It's just add 2000 to it and you get into, the range that you get. And then afterwards you need to tweak it a little bit, but at least it will, immediately handle your data. That's useful, I think. Okay, now about the thing that I know a bit more of. So this is a network visualization. It's immediately, I think, a bit more intimidating and also slightly more difficult sometimes to see what is going on. So I always prefer, even this is a bit, after I'll explain it, I think you'll understand more now, this one. But I would always choose to have even one that is more focused on certain things so that everybody can immediately see what this is about, not just me, because data visualization, again, is also about communication. And if it's just pretty, but not actually nobody else can read it, then I think something's wrong with your visualization. But anyway, sometimes they're very pretty when they're big. So what you can see here is these are people that are mentioned in documents. So at the right hand top of this picture, all those people in that circle blob are mentioned in document 1. Now underneath that, there's people mentioned in document 2. And there's a sort of overlap because that's people who have been mentioned in both documents. That is how these documents or how these people, groups of people, connect the way that I've chosen it to. It could have been something else. It could have been people who phone up each other that we have the records of, or who have written letters to each other. That could also link people up. If I write a letter to Gabby and Gabby writes one to Simona, I may not have a direct link with Simona, but through Gabby we do actually. So that links us all up, and maybe at some point we've all exchanged emails to one person in the room. So we might actually form a big letter network, which is interesting because that means that I may not know you, but I may ask somebody here, do you have the information of that person? And if they don't, they can ask somebody else or even another person, and I would still be able to reach you if I try hard enough. Today with internet, that's not really true anymore because you can just find out anyway. But when we're looking at ancient networks, that is, the mindset that we're in. So that is what this network represents. Obviously, there's lots more documents there. And I'll talk more later about what these colors are in different visualizations, I think. But I hope that this makes sense now a bit, what you're actually seeing, even though it's still quite big, I think. Okay, so why use data visualizations? This is a bit of repeating myself, but so as I said, it's about communicating, explaining something in a good way to people, hopefully, and convince them sometimes of your results or of what you think. It may not always be proper results. And then, as we've seen, sometimes new questions are formed just by looking at the visualization and thinking, I wasn't expecting this, or, oh, this is totally the opposite of what I was thinking it would do. And sometimes it's just, well, for me, sometimes it's just that I was wrong in the way that I thought about something. And then you need to go back to your sources. So it's not just looking at your visualization. You need to go back to your sources and question yourself and your data visualization sometimes as well. Hopefully, when you've done that, when you get past that, there are some suggestions for answers to your questions that you had, hopefully. And sometimes they're the wrong ones because a visualization isn't always, the true answer. It's just the visualization of the data that you have, and you will never have all the real life data. Even if you do, it still doesn't always have to make exact sense. But you can try. And sometimes it does actually, I think, help you get answers to your questions. I think I'm going to try and show you both categories of things, suggestions and answers and mistakes, I think. Okay, so how do you do this? This is a star rating. The first one is tools that are very easy to use. They're all free. You can just download them and you can just start immediately. Even with this very small introduction, you'll be able to make these visualizations yourself. So Voyant tools is just online. Tableau Public is something that you download on your on your desktop and work with that. Then if you don't pay for it, they will know some of your data, which isn't always great. But it's a very good tool though. So then Overview Docs is more about text mining and some visualization of that, but quite good for text mining. Definitely if you don't really, like for me, if I don't really want to go in that, but I sometimes want to quickly see something. And then there's a new thing that I've discovered. Maybe other people know about it already. It's called Media Lab Tools. I think the center is in Paris, and they have lots of tools online that are limited, but that are very powerful. They do web crawling of things. They make graphs for you. They turn your data into graph files, so you can immediately start working with them, making visualization of them. They do all kinds of things. You should definitely have a look at that. And then if you really want to get into this, you can't use the easy tools, obviously. You'll have to get properly into topic modeling, as I said, with Python or R or other things. You can do a lot with R and Python as well, apart from topic modeling. What I use for my network visualizations is Gephi, and you get some network measures as well from that. Okay, seeing how fast I'm talking. Yeah, it's fine. So before I go into all my networks, maybe just quickly say what network analysis exactly is. It's looking at the links, the relationships between actors, whether it's people, events, places, anything, objects, or any of the two together. But also not just looking at those links. As I said, it's about all the links together and looking, taking a step back and seeing all those relationships working together and trying to analyze the structure of the entire network. You can choose a very small network and do it in great detail, or you can choose, all the data of Ptolemaic Egypt and try to see whether there's anything there. There might not be, but there could be some interesting things that you would otherwise never be able to get all that data in your head and have a good overview of it. You'll have lots of little details that but to get that overview, just to see it once is just quite interesting. And that would probably tell you more about what data is missing and where it's really rich than anything else. But that is saying something as well. Again, you just need to know what it can tell you and what it can't tell you. So exactly what is it then without the definition? It's a combination of, the statistics are the most important thing. But I think the graph is very important for humanities scholars as well, because the two together form a very powerful tool, I think. Because you can't just look at the visualization and think, oh, this is positioned here and this is quite big. That must mean that. You still need to go and check the statistics and see what exactly it is, because you might be fooled just visually, because we quickly our intuition isn't always great. But on the other hand, before or when you've seen the statistics, to just give it a bit more flavor and to let your intuition do a bit of work, maybe looking at the visualization, and I think together they work really well. So the sort of data that you need for that, it can be quite simple. You need two data files, one on the actors, so the things or the people or the events that you're going to connect together, and all the attributes that you want to add to that. And then you need another file that says how which actors are linked to which actors. So here, for example, if Ptolemaios and Pelaios, so 1 and 2, wrote a letter to each other, or Ptolemaios wrote a letter to Pelaios, then in the edge file, the source is 1 Ptolemaios and the target is 2 Pelaios, because you use IDs, because other people will be called Ptolemaios, even Ptolemaios, son of Amenotes. And then, that's not going to work. So this is very simple. This is exactly how it could look like. I'll explain a little bit about one measure, because I think it's important that you know before I go on. I promise I won't make it too technical or too difficult. So the centrality measure is probably the most central as well to network analysis. That's what people talk about most. And from those, there's lots of them. There's more than these 4. The degree centrality is the most central one again. what degree centrality means is if you have a high degree as a node, as an actor, it means that you have lots of links. You can see it as somebody who's very popular. They have 20 friends, maybe that's not enough, but well, I'm not very popular, so I wouldn't know. So if one node, one actor has 20 links, for example, they are popular and they can influence other people's decisions. So that is why it's interesting to see people with high degree in your network and see, oh, why is that? And is it really important for them? Are they powerful people? And just think about that. Then another one is closeness. Now, this is quite different. You don't need to have that many links or friends, for example. Say that you have 4. But in comparison to the very popular guy who is on the edge of the network, if you're in the center and all your friends are quite well connected and they know bits here and there of the network, then it is actually easier for you to get information from each part of the network. And if you've got 20 connections, but they're all in the same group, and they're quite on the edge of the network, then it will be quite hard for you to spread your information or get information about a new job opening from the other side of the network, for example. So it's interesting then to compare that somebody with a high degree, somebody with high closeness, whether that's different and who is actually in real life, who was most powerful. Or maybe we have to revise that then. So thinking about that can be something interesting. Then the third one is betweenness. I like betweenness because you don't have to have lots of friends or connections at all. You can have the guy who's really popular, who's got 20 connections, 20 friends, and you can have somebody with 2 friends. But those 2 friends belong to different groups that don't know each other. So what happens there is that if you choose, you can spread information, you can stop it as well, or you can spread false information. You choose if there's a job opening that you know about from one group, whether you're going to tell the other group, because it has to pass through you. It's not like with internet that they can just get around you. They can't. The information has to go through because they don't have any contact with each other. They don't really even know that they maybe exist. So they haven't been introduced, those people. So that gives you quite a lot of power as well, sometimes more than if you have 20 friends who are all connected themselves as well. Well, then they're going to know everything without you, whether you go on a holiday or die, basically. That sounds a bit harsh, but when you go on a holiday, they're not going to lose out on any information. But if the guy that has very high betweenness centrality goes on a sabbatical or something, then suddenly those 2 groups need to find another way to connect or not connect. And then it goes lost, basically, that connection that they had. So I think the CIA uses betweenness centrality to see who they should target. I'm not endorsing this, but to see who they should target in terrorist networks. So the guy with highest betweenness, that's obviously the guy that you need to take out somehow, because that's how information passes, and that's really important. That somebody with high degree is not always that useful, actually. So that is the third centrality, and comparing all these, it's quite interesting to see who is very different, because somebody can have high degree and high betweenness. That's fine, but to see the differences and see who they were in an ancient network definitely is sometimes interesting, sometimes wrong, sometimes interesting. Then finally, the final one, eigenvector. That is, okay. So if you're the president of the States, obviously you've got a lot of connections between groups probably that don't know each other, you've got it all. But the guy who's the best friend of the president of the States, or somebody, who's right next to him, who may only have a connection to him, is still capable of getting quite a lot of information. So eigenvector, you get a high eigenvector if you're connected to really important people in the network, because those people are still really interesting. You may be the emperor of Rome, but one of the secretaries may know almost as much or sometimes more. So it's interesting to look at that as well. These are the 4 main ones that I would use, I think, and I hope they make sense to you now that I've explained them. Now, about my research question. So what I'm looking at is ancient Thebes and sale contracts there. So ancient Thebes was in Upper Egypt. The Valley of the Kings is around there, and queens. Sadly, I'm not looking at that. That would be, fun. But I'm looking at sale contracts, as I said. And the 3 main actors that have often been discussed is, first of all, a scribe. You need a scribe to draw the sale contract. And usually you've got about 2 contractual parties. But in demotic sale contracts, you get a number of 16 witnesses. Sometimes it's a bit less, sometimes a bit more, but 16 seems to be the general number. That's quite a lot of people for a sale contract just somewhere. A lot has been done on those scribes because a lot of information is available. They've done loads of contracts. We know their family a bit. We know that it was passed on, that profession, from father to son. We know quite a lot. We know about their environment, their status. Then other people have done a lot of research into these contractual parties because, again, lots of these contracts have been found in archives together. So you know a lot about the family, about property changing hands. They're very interesting to study, but nobody has really done research into the witnesses, and there's a very good reason for that. And I feel that reason is getting stronger and stronger every day while I'm trying to finish my PhD. Because this is all the information you usually have. It's on the back. These are all sale contracts, demotic sale contracts, and on the back of them, you have this list of 16 witnesses. And what it says is X son of Y, A son of B. And it goes on, and in very rare cases, you get a profession or something like that, which is great. But that is why nobody's done a study into that, because you can't really identify them properly and you don't know that much more about them. But I think that is exactly why I thought that network analysis could maybe not give me any answers, but give me a clue of something, of what direction to look in for this. Because nobody has an idea. Some people say this. Willy Clarisse from Leuven says it was all just random. And it could all be valid. But I think network analysis, because we don't have that direct information, we should use all the indirect information that we have. And there's quite a lot. Do I have time to later talk about that or not? Okay. I'll talk later about that. First, I'll talk about the very first issue that I had, that network analysis was an unlikely help to me there. So it's very difficult to identify these witnesses because they often have common names as well. And as I said, you don't have almost any information about them. So while I was practicing with this network analysis tool, I visualized the data just to get the hang of it. While I was doing that one afternoon, I started with this network on the left. I was a bit interested in the scribes and the contractual parties because I didn't know that much yet about them. And before I started reading everything that is available about them, I thought maybe I should look at the networks and see whether there's then an overlap, whether I can see that it actually tells me something before my mind is polluted with all these other things that people have written about it, to just see that. So on the left, what you see is a network, very simple, of scribes, who are the red dots. And they are connected to blue dots, who are contractual parties, if they've drawn up a contract for them. And sometimes you can see, like between Esminis and Totortaios there, that one contracting party has used both of them. I thought, oh, that's interesting. I'll change the network to make it look on the right-hand side just as a network of scribes. And they are connected if they share a contractual party in common. Because I thought that might show us scribes working together. And because everybody's written about that it's a profession that's being handed down from father to son, I thought it might also not just show us who works together, but these bigger families, scribal families that I didn't know that much about yet. So this is the result of that. And I thought, oh, surely if I add the information now about father and son, so if I add links, so the links that are in here are if scribes have worked together, in my opinion, right? I thought if I'm going to add family links to that, they're going to overlap some of these, because then that would totally fit the hypothesis that people that work together are also family, or father and son. At least Esmilis must be the father of one of those people that surround him, I thought, because he seems the most important one. So I thought he's maybe the main scribe, and people surrounding him might be a son or a cousin or something like that. So I did, and I didn't get any results. Nothing was overlapping. And I thought, okay, everybody's wrong about that then. All these researchers are wrong, and my visualization is great, or the data is wrong and people haven't been identified properly yet. I thought, oh, if even the scribes haven't been identified, how am I ever going to do this PhD in 3 or 4 years? So this is exactly the same as this one, but the fathers have been added. And then I colored, you can do this on a much wider scale, but this is a small scale. Then I colored all the names, for example, Esminis, all red. And then I could see, oh, actually, maybe I'm not wrong, but that Harmais might be the son of Esminis, but that Esminis, his father, has not been identified with the main scribe Esminis. The same goes for Pinhidis and his father Esminis. And then there were a couple of other things. So later that afternoon, I did some more research, research next to the data visualization. And by the evening, I sort of saw groups in there, and then I made a family tree. So I did not know anything about these scribes, right? And the things in bold, the names in bold are scribes, attested as scribes. So that was the evening, and a bit later, around, I think 7 or something, after I'd had my dinner. It's not interesting, but I remember that. It was a memorable day. I read an article by Quagebeur and Pestman, who had done so much excellent research into that. And I saw that they had talked about exactly these scribes, and they had drawn up a lovely family tree that was very similar to mine. And I thought, oh, there goes my original research. But then I realized that I had only, just started my PhD, didn't know anything about these scribes. This is not what I did before I started the PhD. And my family tree was so similar to theirs. It was almost exactly the same. I thought, oh, just one afternoon, just by using the visualization and just doing some of that very basic research, I managed to sort of come up with the same results, which to me showed, oh, I can probably use that to help me identify more of all that data. So that is then how I identified as much as I could, as was possible. That was that story. Now we'll come back to what do you do when you have such limited direct information? As I said, there's so much indirect information about these texts. I usually know the exact dates. I know it's usually about property, so I don't know the exact place of the property, but that's not that important in social group ways. What I do know is the northern neighbor, the southern neighbor, the eastern neighbor, the western neighbor. I know usually, well, for 60% of my text, what archive it belonged to, so sort of what the family environment is. I know some of the professions of the contractual parties, of their families, I know quite a lot about the scribes that are in there. It's probably more than that, I know. Oh, something like that. So that's quite a lot actually to go on. It doesn't immediately tell you anything about the witnesses, but all that together in networks can actually show you something. Another thing that can help you, that I only quite recently figured out, is that you can look at what other places, what the witnesses were like there, who they were, how they were chosen, if any research has been done. Not that much has been done, but there's more information available than there is for Ptolemaic Egypt and before. So I looked at all these from the very beginning of writing till Hellenistic times, who witnesses were and how they were chosen. And sometimes they had a high social status, or they were professionals of some kind. And I guess that is because you need to know, first of all, the laws around contracts. You need to be, a witness needs to be able to know what is right and what is wrong, and you have to be able to depend on them later. And it depends what kind of contract. It's about specific economy of something. Maybe you'll choose somebody who's in that kind of profession. Then other witnesses, sometimes in the same document, right, were linked to scribes. It was the son of a scribe who maybe was just there, who could write, who knows about these things. So why would you not pick him if you have to have a couple? You always know where to find them. And they're still young if it's the son of somebody. So if later on there is a dispute, I guess that makes sense. You're not going to choose somebody very old, maybe, to make sure. At least you're going to put a few young people in there, I would say. And then the third thing that often happened was that I obviously could see that there were some people somehow with a relationship to the contractual parties, a brother or a neighbor of the property, so somebody who had an interest in the property as well that was being sold. And so these are sort of hypotheses that I use to test my data on. I don't want to just look at visualizations and at statistics and try to find something from there. I want to have specific hypotheses that I can test the data against and see how well it matches and how well it doesn't match. And I think it's probably going to be a mix of those things, which is quite difficult to prove. But anyway. Oh, another thing that I found out while doing that is that I started understanding. It's very difficult, I think, to definitely maybe for somebody of my generation to really, I'm never going to be really there, right? But to get into that mindset of how people thought back then about property. Now it's unaffordable for my generation. Back then it was just very different. It was, if you didn't have property, that was what your family had. It's your livelihood. Families don't want to sell it. They want to have it in the family. And when they sell it, it's quite a special thing, which is maybe why they have 16 witnesses and why they all have to be present. It's a big thing, I think. So that has helped me to understand, hopefully, more how it happens. And yeah, anyway. This is a network. What I'm doing right now is I make all the different kinds of networks of my data that I possibly can, and I compare them with one another. This is going to be an example. This is the same network, just a bit more data that we have talked about before. So it's scribes connected if they have contracting parties in common. We've seen this, I know. But then I have another network of exactly the same scribes, but they are only linked here if they have witnesses in common. So if they were in a document that also had a witness that appeared later in somebody else's documents that had been drawn up, because that would show if there would be an obvious connection there, if it was the scribe who delivered the witnesses there, because it's a big group. You could have, some people thought that. There's definitely something that's different here, because the groups split up. But when you actually look at it, there's still quite a lot of the same scribes that do have a connection. So it's not that immediately as strong as you would think from just looking at it visually. When you go into detail, you see, oh, Totartaios is still connected to Ismenis and so on. And I think it has a bit more to do with date. So that one part here is a bit later than the other part, but that doesn't really explain why here it is connected though. So looking into where it disconnects and what the difference is, to see whether, so really going on an individual level almost, to see whether I can say something about that. Sometimes I will and sometimes I won't. Then this is another example. It's a network of the contracting parties according to the witnesses that they have in common. Now again, you can compare this one with the one of scribes and see whether there's more connections or not. Here I obviously left out when it's two contractual parties in the same document, then they use the same 16 witnesses. So I left all that out. But what you can see here from the colors represent archives, and archives usually represent families almost, is that the colors all fit together. So you're more likely, I'm not saying that it is like that, but you are more likely, if you are from the same family, to use the same witness as somebody from your family has done. Not always, because it would be a lot stronger than this, but there seems to be a connection, which points to that it will probably not just be completely random, as Professor Clarissa thinks, I think. This is, how much time do I have left? Because I might want to. Okay. Okay. Something else that I've included, as I said, there's lots of indirect information, and people have never really, except for when they try to plan, map Thebes, ancient Thebes, they've never really used those neighbors. I don't think that's, well, I think it's a bit stupid. Well, I don't want to say stupid, but I'm saying stupid. Because neighbors, I know, are just a geographical thing there, and it's where the property is. But if the family lived there, or part of the family lived there, and a new family is going to live there, they have social interactions. It may be bad ones, they may hate each other, but they know each other. They will have known each other in that community. And if, for example, lots of witnesses later on in the network show up in a certain same, we don't know exactly where, but around properties that are connected to the same sort of neighbors, or even a bit further in the neighborhood, that might also say something about just where they were, maybe where the contract was drawn up. So many more things. I'm not going to really go into detail about the specifics here. This is just to show how much more information you suddenly have with the neighbors. It's not as useful always, but it does tell you something, and it would be stupid not to look at networks that also include neighbors, and to even just look at, I'll just show you. For example, just look at networks of witnesses and neighbors, as I said, only when they appear more than once together. And some of these, the big blobs are not that helpful because that's just about internal things. But the little ones that are connected to quite a lot of neighbors over and over again may point towards something that they have in common, that they just stayed in the same neighborhood, or they were just really interested in a certain property, maybe 50 years before or longer, or 100 years before, because as I said, property is a very different thing back then as a concept. It was once in their, in their family somehow, or they are the cousin of the cousin of the cousin, and because that's still family, they are still sort of there, because as in Karl Marx terms almost, that property is just something different than what we think about now. So that's a couple of people to look at as well, why that is that they appear that often with those neighbors and not the other ones that were apparent in those same documents. Then I thought, but maybe the scribes and the witnesses are so closely connected that it's just because of where the scribal office is, and those witnesses just, always go to that one because they have a deal with those scribes. Maybe, maybe they were paid for it because it's 16 people, having to sit there or stand there, listening to it all being read out, and then all 16 people having to put their autograph down. I mean, that must have been quite a faff in Ptolemaic Egypt. I can imagine, people having a drink, talking. It's a social thing, I think, in my mind. So I thought, I should check whether that network of scribes and neighbors looks almost exactly the same. If it's almost overlapping with those same places, then it's just because those witnesses just always go to the same scribal office maybe, or that's just the place where those scribes drew up their contracts. But it's quite different. So again, it is interesting to look at it, I think. This is then just a combination. Yes. What I'm going to do next, so I haven't given you any big statistics or something like that because I think it's too boring to listen to all that. You'll just have to read my work, buy it preferably. What I'm going to do now is, so as I said, I think that witnesses are probably more a mix of people. There's probably quite a lot in common with the rest of the ancient Near East, but also it's obviously not immediately the same because they didn't have 16 witnesses. So there is something more going on there, but I don't think it's just going to be those 16 people, 8 of them are chosen by the first contracting party, the other 8 by the second contracting party, that's it, or they're just all chosen random just because they're there, or I think it's going to be a mix. Maybe a son of a scribe, one of them, 2 people who are just hanging out there all the time, then a couple of people that the family brought because they sort of represent the family property as well, and it's important that they are present actually when it happens. Maybe a neighbor here and again, because it's important for them to know what's going to happen with the property next to there, that it's going to good people, or, we can all imagine something like that. So what I'm going to do now is take a step back and look at bigger groupings. I would like to see what happens when I just group different parts of witnesses, depending on what information I have, and contracting parties. And because I know that much more attributes about the contracting parties and scribes, I can divide all the contracting parties up in one group who have this kind of profession. They're all prophetes or something. And then you've got the other ones. And then you've got a couple of witnesses who are carpenters, and see whether those groups interact differently with each other in a network. So that's the next stage, because now I've always looked quite on an individual level almost. All these people are different nodes, but I think now it might be interesting, after knowing what I know from all that, to take a step back and look at them as bigger groups, and see whether there's anything there. So as a conclusion, it's never going to give me 100%. This is the answer, this is the truth, and the statistics prove it. It's never going to be like that. But I think it will, what I will find out will put us sort of on a path of at least a way of thinking about it, because now we just don't know. And I think it might give us a clue as to who they were and how they were connected in their community. I think that's the end. Yes. Excellent.
Just turn off the broadcast before we move to questions.